You're listening to
and such a short amount of time to do it in.
a Mamamia podcast.
If you'd looked at Phoebe Burgess's Instagram account 4 or 5 years ago, chances are you would have seen a happy family of almost 3 smiling back at you. Phoebe, a former magazine journalist and influencer, her husband Sam Burgess, the famous NRL player, and a growing baby bump who was their first child, little Poppy, who would be born just a few months later. It was a seriously glamorous looking life. There were family holidays to Hamilton Island, Fiji, and coastal New South Wales. There were trips to the Southern Highlands and a beautiful home, fame and wealth. It was the ultimate highlight reel, but only a few people knew what those family holidays were actually hiding. A tiny handful of individuals in and around the footy club, along with Sam and Phoebe, they were the only ones privy to all the things that had to be kept quiet. But now, Phoebe Burgess is ready to talk. From Mamamia, you're listening to No Filter, a podcast where people from all walks of life tell their stories very candidly and aren't afraid to be vulnerable. My name is Mia Friedman. If you don't follow the NRL, you might not even be familiar with Phoebe Burgess. But that doesn't matter because her story is bigger than what happened to her, and it's certainly bigger than the game of rugby league. For the entirety of her 5-year marriage, Phoebe Burgess carried her ex-husband's 2 kids, his last name, and the weight of his demanding football career. And like many women who've been in relationships with powerful Australian sporting stars, she's also been left to carry a whole lot of the burdens that come with the massive fame bestowed on these men by clubs that protect them and fans who worship them. For quite a few years, Sam Burgess was one of the NRL's golden boys, until a series of questionable decisions and criminal behaviour ended both his career and his marriage. It began in 2018 when the South Sydney Rabbitohs star was accused of exposing himself to a female fan while on a video call. He was ultimately cleared of misconduct by the club and the NRL Integrity Unit. It then came out that he had a weeks-long affair with a woman while captaining England in the Rugby League World Cup in 2017. Things escalated. In 2020, Sam Burgess faced court on an intimidation charge after a heated verbal confrontation with Phoebe's father, Mitch Hook. He was initially found guilty, but the conviction was overturned. And then just a few months ago, in May 2021, Sam Burgess was convicted of driving with cocaine in his system after being pulled over on his way to visit his children in the New South Wales Southern Highlands. He was sentenced to a 9-month good behaviour bond and a traffic offenders program. Since then, Sam's appeared on SAS Australia, a reality show which he won after making a few tearful confessions about infidelity. Despite all that's happened, he seems well on the way to public redemption. Because if you're good at sport, we're a pretty forgiving nation. And his former wife? Well, Phoebe's been pretty silent until now. You're about to hear a 2-part interview with Phoebe where things get very raw and emotional. But there are a couple of things that you need to know first. There are some things Phoebe just can't say. Some of them are for legal reasons, and some are because Sam is the father of her 2 little kids. So why is she speaking to me today? It's pretty simple, really. She wants to tell her story. As a woman who married into a famous sporting family and an extremely dominant footy club culture, where players' images must be protected, it's taken a long time to find her voice. Looking back over the past few years, she can see things she missed at the time. Red flags, warning signs, misgivings, all the things she wants other women to be aware of. In part 1 of our interview, I asked Phoebe to go back to where it all started, before things went off the rails. Do you remember the day that you met Sam Burgess?
Yeah, I do. I remember it very clearly, actually. It wasn't that long ago, really. We both ended up at a concert, and I can't speak for Sam, but neither of us really were concert goers.
What sort of concert?
It was an Avicii concert, and I was working for Clio at the time. It was 2014. It was very early. It was January. I'd just come back from skiing overseas and I was going in to have back surgery soon, but I decided to go to a concert with my girlfriends. And I was walking through this VIP area and I was never
Fancy.
VIP. Well, I was working for Clio and my editor, my features editor, had given me her tickets.
And what was your job at Clio then?
Well, I started out as an entertainment writer and then I ended up being more of a hard news features writer, mixed with a bit of entertainment. And I had my little segment on Channel 9, on 9 News Now in the afternoons. And at 25, I'd worked in TV and magazines and I felt like I was just starting to get on a bit of a roll and figure
build
out
your career.
Yeah, and also figure out who I was and what kind of writer I wanted to be. You know, I'd been at university for 4.5 years and I'd got a job at Sunrise. So I was writing the news overnight for Sunrise, for Nat Bar at the time. Well, still Nat Bar for Nat. And in the day I would go to university at Sydney Uni. So that was my life a little bit. Anyway, so I ended up in this VIP area I really wasn't meant to be in.
And were you single?
Was I single? I can't remember. No, that's right. I had just broken up with a really lovely, sorry, Ed. I'd just broken up with a really, really lovely guy, distance issues. He was in Perth, I was in Sydney. Anyway, this big, giant person walked past me and he had his hood up and he was wearing a white hoodie that said disgrace on the front. Anyway, he said, hello, how you going? And I guess we just chatted in the VIP area for the whole concert.
Did you know who he was?
Drinking. I knew of Sam when he introduced himself to me and we spoke about what he did. And I think you can probably tell because there was a big group of them and he'd walked past me on his own. But when you see a group of rugby players together, it was pretty clear that they were athletes, yes. But was I an NRL fan at that point? Probably not.
What do they look like altogether? Like what sort of energy did they give off?
It was intense. I think you're looking up at people and you're at a concert, so I was wearing my Connies.
So they were he's very tall?
Very dominant, tall. They're intimidating, I guess, is probably the best word because I probably didn't belong there chatting to them. I wasn't, a friend of theirs. I wasn't related to anybody. But I was having a really free and easygoing, sober conversation with someone who at the time was really lovely. We connected over the fact that his mother taught French. I spoke French. We both had a new niece and nephew, and it was really average. It was a really normal conversation.
Was there chemistry straight away?
Yeah, there was. It's actually really odd going back that far in my memory and thinking about everything with a smile on my face because he was charming. And he was energetic. He was passionate. I could barely understand him. His accent was really thick. So
he got a Northern English accent?
Yep. And we were speaking very closely. He was, speaking right down in my ear because it was loud. We were at a concert. So it was intimate and it was fun. And he said he was going to walk home. And I said, okay, well, be careful. It was lovely to meet you. And he left. And then he ran back and he said, give me your phone. And then after that, we didn't speak for quite a while. And then our first date was when I was actually in hospital. So, yeah.
How did you end up having your first date when you were in hospital?
Well, oddly enough, I had sort of forgot about things and gone on with life a little bit. And I was typing at my desk and I couldn't feel my left leg. And I had injured my back for about the third time. And I was having nerve problems with my left leg and it went numb. So my doctors, got me straight into surgery for a clean out, injections, epidurals, pain relief for about 2 weeks. I was in hospital for about 14 days. And I was watching the news and there was this guy I met at the concert and he had been coming back from overseas. I think he'd been to England for a funeral. And I messaged. The story was that he was going to rugby union. And I messaged him. And I said, hey, I've just seen you on television. I want to wish you all the best in your rugby union transition or something like that.
Had you been texting a little bit before?
Not once. I didn't use the phone number. But I saw him and that triggered, that's the guy I met. Gosh, he was lovely. Yeah. And then he called me. He said, don't text me, call me. And that was his big line. And then so we spoke for a long time and he said, look, I live around the corner from St. Vincent's. Do you feel like any food? Can I bring you anything up? And that was our first date. Was on Valentine's Day and he brought me my favourite meal, famish, from around the corner. And we ate some food and chatted over tea.
I can't think of a more vulnerable situation and a less sexy situation
No,
than
I
being flat
asked,
on your back.
some people would find that sexy.
But in the wrong way.
That came a lot later.
on a lot of painkillers, I imagine.
Well, that's right. But it was also really innocent. We were 25. Yeah. It was also really, I guess, pure, and there was no fanfare around it. There was no carry-on. There was no makeup, high heels, lovely restaurants. There was no alcohol.
Fancy knickers.
No. And do you know what, though? It wasn't, yes, there was chemistry, but it was in a really friendly way. And I think we were mates first, which I think was pretty cool, which I wasn't expecting. And I think a friend of mine said, oh, go on, let yourself have a bit of a fling, your worlds won't really collide. You don't sort of know each other on the outside. And I'd never had a fling in my life, and I married my fling. But with the sexy thing, I did ask my best friend, who's also a Phoebe, I said, this guy is coming over with some food tonight. Can you run into my apartment, get me some fake tan and my basic trackies? So I had a bit of fake tan on, and I had some basic tracksuit pants.
You were out of a hospital gown.
Yeah, I wasn't in a hospital gown. I made sure of that. And he told me I smelled like the hospital. Romance.
When did you start seeing each other properly? Like how fast did it rev up?
Sam drove me home to my parents' house from hospital. He wanted to take me home. And he came home and he met my family on about the 4th day that we'd hung out. And we stayed in separate rooms. But I got the feeling that, and at that point, I wasn't following rugby league. I didn't know his story in its entirety. And, I'm human, so I was Googling to make sure that there was nothing, no huge red flags. And at the time, no one was drinking. There was no partying. It was a pretty people getting to know each other.
Low-key environment. Yeah, you
innocently.
weren't at
I got the feeling. Yeah, I got the feeling he was trying to leave something behind. I got the feeling that he wanted out of a certain type of way he'd been living, and he came down to Barrel and it was fresh air and patting horses, feeding horses. It was just all really wholesome, I guess, is the word for it.
How much did you know about NRL culture and the people that hang around NRL players and some of the behaviour they get up to? You're a journalist, so you've obviously read and probably written a few stories. Yeah,
I hadn't written any at that point, but I knew enough to know that I wanted my relationship with Sam to be private. It was private for 8 months before we told anybody. Well, obviously our families along the way found out, but we were taking our time to get to know each other. I didn't want... It's ironic looking back on it, but I didn't want the tag of being a wag, whether if it was serious or not. I didn't really believe in that tag at all. I didn't believe sort of what it was trying to do, and I really don't now.
It's a really demeaning tag, isn't it?
Yeah, it's throwing individuals all into the same basket and suggesting that each and every one of them are exactly the same, whereas some of the women I met were pretty atrocious. And some of them were my favourite people in the world. There was a really mixed bag of behaviour, of people, of backgrounds. And I just found that term, it's such a male term and it's so condescending, the wives and girlfriends. And if you don't fit into a girlfriend or you don't fit into a wife, what are you? And it creates a hierarchy. Like, it's not spoken, it's not said, but it's there and it's an undercurrent. And there was a big deal made out of me going to the footy for the first time. Where would I sit? Who would I sit with? There were things along the way that I found weird. I was in a boy-girl.
Who made that big deal?
When I look back, I think it was probably, I keep saying Sam, my ex-husband being protective, I think, probably his private life. And also he knew something that I didn't, that it would be made a big deal of. And whether or not he was hoping to keep it what it was, which was two people hanging out a lot and really enjoying each other's company without the mess that might come from us being out in the wild, I guess. We would go out for dinner and we would hold hands, but we spend a lot of time in each other's homes, in each other's real world. And that's when I think things were probably the best, when you keep that special relationship, when you keep something to yourself. That was when it was most sacred to me.
What was it like that first time?
When I went to the football?
Yeah.
It was fine. I drove myself out. I mean, you're thrown to the wolves a little bit. People stare at you. People want to know everything about you. Some people would like to be close to you. Some people will sit back a little bit and see. But, you know, it's like any environment that's a little bit sort of institutionalized, like a college, like school. There are cliques. There are the nice girls. There are the less nice girls. No one was mean. No one was awful. There were no, really horrible scenarios. It was just weird. It was different. It was a different way to be in love. It was a different way to get to know somebody. And you would watch the game and then you would, potter down to the change rooms and you would wait for the men to finish and come out and greet the families. And a few fans would be in the change rooms and you'd get your kiss and everyone would look at you, and it was all a bit bizarre. And then at that time, we would actually drive from under the stadium and drive out to another location, I guess, which was an aquatic centre, and the boys would get in the water and warm down, and we would be given a buffet at sort of 1 till about 2 in the morning, and there'd be kids running around, and yeah, it was a weird sort of, not a cult, it was a subculture. It was but it was very much behind the scenes. It was private, it was under lock and key, it was family only. So if you were someone who was going from the outside to going to the inside, you were going in. You were entering that world, that space, that environment that's kept only for players and their families.
You describe it as a subculture, which I think is a great way of putting it. In all subcultures, there are explicit rules and there are implicit rules.
Yeah.
How did you learn what they were?
Oh, gosh, we'd always have to get specific. There were, I think your relationship with your player, in inverted commas, you would decide what those rules were, what you went to and what you didn't, what was expected of you and maybe what wasn't. And some relationships were a little bit more structured, and the wife would be at every game with the children regardless of the time, and it was a routine for them and a ritual. And the optimal thing as a partner was to make sure your partner was good and ready to go on game day. They were happy. They were in a good frame of mind. So I know that girls didn't pick fights with their partners on game day. I know that when I first got there, going out drinking after a game was sort of accepted, but then as time went on, that sort of started to not be the way to go about it. The sort of more senior players looked down on younger players going out drinking, especially if they had an injury. It was banned. So it was all about making sure the best possible version of that player got out onto the field, and winning was the goal. So if you were going to be a distraction, don't be there.
Right. So it sounds like there wouldn't be a lot of room for the wives and girlfriends of the players to have identities of their own apart from being support crew, or is that not true? Like, could you have a big career? Could you have
not that
a big
I saw.
life?
I didn't see too many huge careers. It sort of really depended on where the player was at and if there needed to be a dual income. I mean, some players and partners were high school sweethearts, and it's the way that it had always been for them, and they'd had children quite young, and their partner's role was to look after the children and get up with the baby in the night, which we know players need their sleep. So that was a really big thing, and that was a role that they would fulfill. And then some girls, I met an unbelievable school teacher, and she was incredible, and she had her own life, her own job, and it was very, in inverted commas, normal. And then there was a wonderful Pilates instructor, and she was great. She was building an empire. And so I saw there were some people, women there who I really looked up to. I didn't think at that point that I would have to sacrifice anything in my life to be able to be with the person I loved. I didn't think that I would have to. I was under the impression that I could have both, that I could have my career over here in magazines and a fledgling role on television and be with the person I loved. I thought that that could be how it was.
Did you and Sam talk about your career?
A lot. I was under the impression that that was very much, my independence was very much what drew him to me. It's very odd to speak about these things going back so far because so much has happened since then, and the rules did change about my career. But something in my stomach or in the back of my mind told me to hang on to it, to hold it with both hands and not let that little bit of independence, that little bit of who I was before I became his partner and then his wife, to not let that go. So any sort of context I was put in, I tried to maintain it, to hold on to my job, to hold on to that little bit of me pre-NRL, Rabbitohs Sam. So when we went to Bath together, which was overseas, and Sam played rugby union, I wrote a column for the Bath Life, which was a magazine over there, and so I got in there and I would do some freelance writing in London. So I would go and interview if there were some press junkets. I would go and that lasted for a little bit, but I found it really hard not working. I didn't know what to do with myself, not having somewhere to be every day. But it was worth it being over there. I was young and it was love and it was an adventure, and I was swept up in so much of my own fairy tale because it was happy. It really was, until it wasn't.
Deciding to get married, was that a change in your status?
To be honest, Sam and I as a couple did what we wanted whenever we wanted. I know that children were brought into our sort of bubble. The idea of having children was very much at the forefront of his mind. And I explained that for me, I believed in the process of being together for a while and potentially having a commitment like marriage before we entered into having kids, because I was under no false illusion that having children would be just cute photos by the side of the pitch. I knew it was going to be hard work, and I knew, given our relationship and given the realities of his career and his job, I knew that the responsibility and the caretaking would be on me. I predicted it, but I didn't predict how hard and how isolating I would actually find that.
Was there anyone around you that kind of said, Phoebes, this isn't the kind of long-term partnership that's going to be very equal in terms of his profile, his power within it?
I was never intimidated by that, though. I felt
not intimidated, but the inequality of it. Like whoever, if
he chose me.
He's famous,
right?
He earns all this money. You're writing articles for the Bath press. Things are getting more and more unequal. You're slowly losing power and autonomy within your relationship.
Well, that's right. I had to go overseas and be dependent on this person because my income wasn't what it was. And I'm very aware of the privilege that I have while I lived in Australia, which was a really supportive family, an apartment in Sydney. So I always sort of toiled away and tried to make the most of every opportunity that I got. And I knew that going overseas and basically putting all the eggs in the basket, that's what I was doing. But when you're that young, I never doubted my ability. I was in love and we were a partnership and we were a team. I never felt what you're talking about until I did. I didn't for a really long time. I had a really supportive partner at the time, and I never felt that there was going to be a huge shift, because within our relationship, when it was the two of us together and the two of us alone, without all the external factors, without the pressures of, we were a team and they were on the side. Our relationship came first.
I'm Mia Friedman, and you're listening to part 1 of No Filter with Phoebe Burgess. For a lot of people, they don't even realise that they have expectations around what a marriage will look like and what roles will look like in a marriage until they get into one. And then it becomes obvious that perhaps they don't both have the same view of what a husband or a wife looks like. Did marriage change things for you, either for better or for worse?
See, I grew up with a really steady marriage and relationship and household around me. So my view and my background told me that marriage was the next step and that there were going to be ups and downs, but you get through it. But you look after each other. And the biggest, most fundamental ingredient that I saw in my parents' marriage was mutual respect. Regardless of who earned the money, regardless of who's having the children, there was a mutual respect for each other's role in that relationship and in that marriage. And they were fundamentally equal. My dad did some wonderful things in his career, but if he didn't have my mum, he wouldn't be knowing what sock goes on which foot.
Yeah, right.
So I grew up with this incredible team. And when I looked at it, I didn't think my mum gave up anything. She saw her life as glass full. And my dad, and it's not to say that everything was easy, but they worked just as hard on their love and their marriage and their respect for each other as they did everything else. Gosh, I saw fights, but they always made up.
And he respected her contribution, even if it wasn't financial.
It was vital.
Yeah.
When my dad retired, the person he thanked was my mum, and we were all there. We all saw that. That was that's what I thought I was entering into.
When did it occur to you that maybe it wasn't going to be like that for you?
There were moments along the way. Because he spent so much time at home with my family, it never occurred to me that he might not understand what a really good marriage or a really good relationship looks like, and that there are warts, it's ugly, it's hard, it's difficult, there are ups, there are downs. I don't think that he thought a marriage ending was that big of a deal, because every relationship around him had ended. And I didn't realise that until I went looking for reasons why things may or may not have been working out. And I couldn't give you an exact moment. All I can say, we spoke about this before we entered the therapy room, and it's that analogy of the frog. You throw a frog in boiling water, it's going to scream. If you turn the heat up slowly, it stays there and it just cooks alive. And that's little things started adding up. And I wish I'd listened to what my body was telling me. I became extremely anxious after having my daughter, after having back surgery, to the point where I couldn't drive. I was just afraid of driving. And that's something that was never part of my personality. Mm. I couldn't drive on a highway without feeling as though I wasn't in control. And I think those were symptoms of what I was starting to go through emotionally and mentally. I was starting to, I felt, lose myself. And I think I thought I would be a lot more, I don't know how to say this. I thought that when you had children, that the support was guaranteed. I thought you would have some space for growth to become a mum over time. You know, my mum is the most incredible mother. And I think I was always going to find having really small children, being tied to something, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that was completely my responsibility, difficult, because I was giving up certain freedoms that I was used to, independence. That's right.
Massive shift.
But I think culturally in the NRL, you're just supposed to get on with it. There really isn't. What I notice most is that you're constantly celebrating your partner and their successes, their glory, their disappointments, their losses. But I saw a lot of the partners having to suck up their private pain in favour of football outcomes. Mm. I didn't see many women celebrated. I didn't see any achievements being celebrated by the club for the partners. We were placated with dinners here and there. This is a partners get together. I always found it really bizarre that the celebrations were boys' night, girls' night. They were always separate. And I think that was under the guise of someone had to look after the kids. But I felt it was a really bizarre gender dichotomy. We were just completely on opposite ends. Girls do this, boys do that. And I found that sort of separation, segregation almost. No, that's not the right word. That separation, really bizarre. And you start to notice that, though, when you have children and, the more mundane life things start to happen. Boys go out on a boys' night, and there was this sort of releasing the pressure valve that they got all the time. So pressure throughout a season would end and culminate in a Mad Monday celebration and, heading off drinking or going overseas, whatever that player needed to do to release the pressure. I never saw what it was on this side, partners releasing the pressure. That just kind of didn't happen, really.
Was there support given to the women?
By who?
by the club?
When you say support, what do you think support would look like?
It's a great question. Oh, you're good at this. Well,
you know, when we say support, like, what does it? Is it therapy? Is it therapy? Is it a creche? We had a creche at the games. If your kids wanted to be with the childminders,
it seems like, and I don't mean to be disparaging of any individuals, because of course they're actual real people and every relationship is different, but the general way that wives and girlfriends are seen seems to be similar to, or you tell me, is it similar to like how a physiotherapist would be seen, or all the different people that are there to help optimize that player so he can play his best?
Yeah, so are we there for cuddles and sex, you know, and then the
and
physio
photo
had their, well, yeah, I mean, only
Or
a
not?
certain, well, only, look, I think a lot of clubs like to say they're a family club.
Yes.
And
What does that
that's-
mean?
Well, it's enticing for sponsors. When
Yeah.
you think about a football club as being a business, this is where I think that you get into trouble. They get into trouble. Clubs get into trouble with behaviour, because there is a bottom line and sponsors like good behaviour. And, you know, trying to figure out how to say this eloquently, they will make it appear as though there is good behaviour regardless of whether there is or there isn't.
So bad behaviour will be not just condoned but covered up actively.
It will be gotten rid of. And it depends what player you're dealing with. If it's bad behaviour by a player that's little known, they might be shown the back door. If it's a player that's doing really well or who's in the spotlight or, you know, might be a marquee player, there are certain things that are expected of that player. But because of the pressure cooker that they're all in, I feel that the slip-ups are almost inevitable. And then the culture, though, is inbuilt. The system is there to take care of it when that behaviour isn't up to scratch. So I sometimes feel as though NRL players push back against the role model tag because it is a lot to live up to.
It is. And they just want to play their sport,
footy.
right? Yeah, which...
But that's not true. You are a role model. My son, I'm sort of starting to expect, will probably grow up being part of the NRL culture in some way. Will he watch it? Will he play it? Will he just know that his father was an NRL player? I don't know the levels yet. But being a mum, if I could shield my son from that culture, I would do everything I could to do that. And that's why I think that the NRL needs to check in with the way they deal with human behaviour, because they spiral. Things spiral out of control. Once there's one mistake, that gets covered up and put away. And there are formulas, there are ways in which they do this. I've been saying I wish that the NRL as an institution would look at how they might potentially rehabilitate a man instead of his image. And
Can you give me an example?
well, I guess we could look at the sexting scandal that I was involved in. There was a woman who had gone to the South Sydney Rabbitohs club, and she had images of a player who was exposing himself to her. Those images were in the end of my then husband, Sam. I was pregnant at the time with my son Billy, and there was a media storm around the fact that a married father was, you know, engaging in sending lewd pictures to a woman. And the way it was sexed up by the media really sort of fed into the whole NRL scandal scenario. And at that time, it was a really, you know, it was an awful... We were at the movies together and we got a phone call. We were watching Crazy Rich Asians, which has been ruined for me forever. And we were leaving Bondi Junction, and I looked up at my husband, and his face was white. He started looking around frantically. I thought he was going to be sick, and I just remember sort of holding him through the centre, because he'd just been told that there was no way of stopping it. The story was out tomorrow. It was breaking that he had been FaceTiming a girl and he had been exposing himself to her. And it started off as a group of players having a bit of a joke after a game, drinking wine. And as someone who was in the club, I was fed all of the narrative that would make it a really easy situation for Sam to slip out of. He was the victim. She had conned him into a game of peekaboo And this became a really big game in the media. It was first reported and then it's followed up by a bit of smearing of the victim. Was she just a fangirl? And it was, a fan is not a dirty word. She was a fan. I actually ended up speaking to her after it, and she was a fan. She loved the sport. She loved the game. She loved the club. She actually loved the players she was speaking to. And she thought she was living out a childhood dream of getting to speak to some NRL players. And then it descended into what it did. I found out that the player was my husband. And I don't know if I'm really giving this story justice, but it started to break me. And I was sent down to my parents' house in Barrel. I was sent away.
When you say you were sent, who sent you?
Well, when a scandal breaks, your house gets surrounded by paparazzi, by TV cameras. I didn't leave the house. I was pregnant. I had my I think she was at the time 18-month-old daughter to look after. And this is when I found out. So it had actually happened back in May after we had been trying to conceive my son for 5 to 6 months. So we planned our family. It was never sort of an accident that forced us together. We had planned both of our children, and they came from a lot of love. But I would be gotten rid of because then there would be images of the sad wife. Or poor, I was the ultimate victim, and I was really angry at the time of being called a victim. I had swallowed up the story that I was being given from the inside, which was he was tricked. It's because he has such a big profile.
So they were gaslighting you.
Well, I didn't know the term back then. I had no idea. I'd never...
Gaslighting is when you, for those who don't know it, it's such a great term because it's when someone tries to convince you that what you believe is that reality is not actually true. This story is actually true.
And that
makes you doubt yourself, doesn't it?
Well, that became such a huge part of my relationship in lots of different ways, on lots of different levels, being told, well, no, Phoebe, you don't remember it properly. No, you're not seeing it right. You don't know the whole story. What you think, that's not true, darling. Let's think about that. Let's rehash it. Let's revisit it. Let's rewrite the narrative, So I was so sucked in. I was the ultimate defender of my husband, I believed that he'd been made a victim. And then came the night where the next woman had decided that she was going to tell her story as well, that my husband had had an affair while he was captaining England in 2017, while I was travelling around the country with our daughter to watch his games. And that night broke me.
You just take time. Don't apologise. Do you want a tissue? Thank you for listening to this episode of No Filter. Part 2 of my chat with Phoebe will be out later in the week.
I was put in scenarios, I was sharing images. No one made me do that. But I was putting out there probably what I wanted if I psychoanalyze myself. I was projecting the image that I knew I could have. I have 2 beautiful, healthy children. And a lot of happiness and a lot of love was there, but that wasn't the only thing that was going on. And I was holding on to those little moments really tight because my family was on the line.
And, of course, I shouldn't even need to say it, but I will. Just like any other interview on No Filter, this was not a paid conversation. If you want to read more of Phoebe's story, head to mamamia.com.au. We'll put some links in the show notes. And if you're looking for a bit of light relief in your afternoons, you will love Mamamia's daily entertainment and pop culture podcast. It's called The Spill. It's hosted by Laura Brodnick and Key Rees. It's the way I catch up on everything that's been going on each day. It is your daily pop culture fix. Have a listen.
Laura Brodnick, what do we think about the latest Keat developments?
Oh, I hate that we're even talking about this. It's so weird.
Oh, shut up. You were so into this. We both pitched it this morning. Don't even pretend you're too good for
No,
this.
I want to talk about it, but
Don't
just like...
even. Get down in the mud with me. Let's roll around, honey. Come on.
Guys, Keat's also taken her shirt off, so now she's jumping around saying roll in the mud with me just in her bra.
Okay, look, I got a little hot talking about Pete Davidson. Can you blame me?
You can find it wherever you get your podcasts. The assistant producer of No Filter is Lucy Neville, and the executive producer is Eliza Ratliff. I'm Mia Friedman, and if you want more of us in your life, come and visit the Mamamia app. And just by reading or listening to our content, just by listening to this podcast today, you are helping to fund girls in schools in some of the most disadvantaged countries in the world. Through our partnership with Room to Read, we're currently sending 300 girls to school every single day, and our aim is to get to 1,000 and then 10,000. Because at Mamamia, our core purpose is to make the world a better place for women and girls.
Mamamia acknowledges the traditional owners of the land we have recorded this podcast on, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures.